We continue now at the top of Daf Lamed Amud Aleph in Meseches Sotah. This is Sotah Daf 30a. On the previous summon, Rabbi Yossi brought a Kal V'chomer to prove that there's such a thing as Revi by Kodesh, and the Kal V'chomer was brought from a case of Mechusar Kippurim. We say just like a Mechusar Kippurim is mutter in Truma, is Asr in Kodesh, so too when it comes to a Shlishi by Truma, so we'll say that that can create a Revi by Kodesh. And so Rabbi Yochanan asked on Rabbi Yossi's reasoning, he asked Brisa, and in the Brisa the Chacham are talking specifically about food that comes into contact with a Tvul Yom, and over there the Chachamim say that it doesn't go to the level of Revi B'Kodesh, it only goes to the level of Shlishi. And so therefore the question was, if you see from Tvul Yom, you see exactly not like Rabbi Yossi says. And so the Gemara had responded that actually Rabbi Yossi doesn't necessarily follow the Chacham in that Brisa. It could be he follows the position of Abba Shol in that Brisa, that there is a Revi by Kodesh in terms of cases of Tvul Yom. Rashi points out there was another Tan over there in that Brisa as well that he could have been following. It could have been following Rabbi Meir. But in any case, the Gemara then responded and said that it cannot be that Rabbi Yossi follows the opinion of Abba Shol, because if Rabbi Yossi followed the opinion of Abba Shol, he could have made his original Kal V'chomer from the case of Tvul Yom itself, and this is a continuation of that potential Kal V'chomer. So we'll say that Shlishi Haba Machmas Sheni. So if when it comes to the situations of Tvul Yom, it reaches the level of Revi B'Kodesh, so when you have also a Shlishi that becomes Tameh from a Sheni, the Sheni Gufei Asr B'Chulin, that we know there's a level of Sheni when it comes to Chulin, and no din Revi B'Kodesh. Isn't it logical that there should be a Revi B'Kodesh? In other words, again, the point is that if Rabbi Yossi followed Abba Shol, he could have used Abba Shol's halacha to create his Kal V'chomer in terms of Revi B'Kodesh in cases of Tumah that come from Sheni, from an Ochel that's a Sheni, and therefore, since he did not use that Kal V'chomer, it's clear he does not follow Abba Shol, and therefore Rabbi Yochanan really does have a question on Rabbi Yossi. If Rabbi Yossi is not following Abba Shol, so we have a question on Rabbi Yossi from the Chachamim in that Brisa in terms of Tvul Yom. Rashi over here explains, Shalishi Haba Machmas Sheni. So again, why is it preferable to use this other Kal V'chomer from Abba Shol? So Rashi explains, the Shaminon Minei Tarti. If you're going to make the Kal V'chomer from Abba Shol, you'd actually learn two halachas from there. Shma Mino Ochel Haba Machmas Tvul Yom. Just very like Abba Shol. You would first of all, you'd learn about this halacha by foods that touch a Tvul Yom, that over there it goes to the level of Revi by Kodesh. Ushma Mino Shlishi Haba Machmas Sheni. And then you'll also hear the halacha of, let's say you have a Shlishi that comes from a Sheni, that creates a Revi by Kodesh. Nihi the Chamishi B'Kodesh Lo Omar the Naisi Mina. Now, grant we're not going to learn out Chamishi by Kodesh. That we're never going to learn out. Kedeka Avid B'Tvul Yom, like we're saying by Tvul Yom. Now, by Tvul Yom, it's not really that we're doing a level of Chamishi by Kodesh. It's just that there was a special Chumrah by Tvul Yom, that the Tvul Yom himself is going to be considered a Rishon, and therefore that's considered like an extra level. Therefore, it goes down to Revi by Kodesh. And again, Rashi is just calling that, referring to that as Chamishi by Kodesh. But that we're not going to say. The Hasa Maila D'Rabbanan, because that's like Rashi explained on the previous summit, that's just a stringency of the Rabbanan. That the Rabbanan, they were stringent, and they said we're going to view the Tvul Yom as a Rishon. Uva Kodesh mi Kodesh Ma'iri, and that's talking specifically a Chumrah by Kodesh from Kodesh, meaning all the different foods over there were Kodesh. For Rabbi Yossi mi Doraisa Kama. Rabbi Yossi's talking on a Doraisa level, so that you're certainly not going to say. Avol Revi, but again, and this is all as Rashi said before, but again, if you're going to at least learn out from the Doraisa level from Abba Shol, at least you can learn out Revi. But Revi, Miya Aisa Mina, you can certainly learn from there. And again, as Rashi says, it's preferable to learn from there. And the Gemara continues, V'chitema. Now, if you're going to say the reason why Rabbi Yossi doesn't want to learn from Abba Shol, maybe he really does hold like Abba Shol, but the reason why he doesn't want to learn from Abba Shol, Mishum de'ikol mifrach malet Tvul Yom shekena avatuma, because you can always refute that Kal V'chomer, because you can't learn from Tvul Yom, because Tvul Yom is unique, because that involves avatuma. That was a refutation we used previously as well, but that's not going to be a good refutation, because ha'isina mi Mechusar Kippurim, because really Rabbi Yossi does bring his proof from Mechusar Kippurim. There also, Mechusar Kippurim also involves Fatuma, velo parche, and that's not refuted, so clearly that was not an issue. So again, we're left with this question that again, if you're going to bring this brisa, Rabbi Yochanan says, and clearly Rabbi Yossi does not hold like Abba Shol, because he would have brought the Kal V'chomer from Abba Shol, so then Rabbi Yossi's, let's say, going like the Chacham in that brisa, that's going to be a refutation of Rabbi Yossi's Kal V'chomer. Rashi says, V'chitema ha'isina Rabbi Yossi mi Kal V'chomer mi Mechusar Kippurim. Again, we already know Rabbi Yossi brought a Kal V'chomer from Mechusar Kippurim. De'ikol lemifrach nami mala Mechusar Kippurim shekein avatuma. You could have the same refutation. Mechusar Kippurim also involves avatuma. V'lo parech, and there's no refutation that's given over there. The lo chashuv, obviously he doesn't consider that to be a refutation. The lo chashuv Kivle Rabbi Yossi Pirchi Rabbi Yossi doesn't consider that a refutation. Ta'ashta the Tavala Azlala Yituma, because of course once the person is immersed, that tumah is already gone, so the Ava tumah issue is not an issue according to Rabbi Yossi. We'll take a look at Tosas over here because Tosas does ask a fundamental question in terms of the full logic of the Gemara here. Shlishi haba machmas sheni. Again, it would have if he held like Abishol, he should have brought a kal v'chomer from the case of Tvul Yom. Peirish Rashi, again, Rashi explains the Shaminon Mine Tarti. If you're going to learn it from Abishol's case of Tvul Yom, you learn two chidushim. Shaminon Mine Ochel Haba Machmas Tvul Yom. You're going to understand that by an Ochel that touches a Tvul Yom, that becomes tummy from a Tvul Yom, that there we have a Revi Bakodesh, the Srir like Abishol, meaning that he holds like Abishol. Shaminon Mine, the Shlishi Haba Machmas Sheni. You'll also understand that if you have a Shlishi from a Sheni, that's also going to be a Revi by Kodesh. And so Tosas asks, Tema, this Gemara over here is a wonder. Kevan de Yolif Kal V'chomer l'Shlishim Mechusar Kippurim. Because that original case of Shlishi, meaning the case of Abishol himself, as Rashi explained in the previous Amud, where does Abishol learn this idea of Revi by Kodesh in the situation of Tvul Yom? He learns that from Mechusar Kippurim. That is the source for everything anyhow. Lav Memela Shaminan Minei de Islay Abishol. So don't we see anyways that he holds like Abishol? Isn't it clear that Rabbi Yossi holds like Abishol because everything is learned from the same Kal V'chomer? Abishol learns his Kal V'chomer from Mechusar Kippurim. That's how he learns his halacha by Tvul Yom. And Rabbi Yossi is learning his halacha when it comes to Shlishi from Sheni, that it goes to Revi Bakodesh. He learns that from He learns that from Mechusar Kippurim as well. The V'hai Kal V'chomer Guvei de Mechusar Kippurim. It's from the Kal V'chomer from Mechusar Kippurim that starts everything. Naf Galon Ochel Haba Machmas Tvul Yom. That's where we learn out that if you have a food that touches a Tvul Yom, the Avid Revi, that it can create up to the level of Revi in terms of Tumah. So Imkain Amai Havalei Lemisnei LeRevi Bakodesh Me'ochel Haba Machmas Tvul Yom. So if that's the case, why would Rabbi Yossi should have brought his halacha of Revi Bakodesh from the case of Ochel from Tvul Yom? V'chilo Maisi LeShaper Tzvei Mechusar Kippurim Guvei Midahave Maisi LeMe'ochel Haba Machmas Tvul Yom the Ochel Haba Machmas Tvul Yom Guvei Lo Shaminan Le Ela Mikal V'chomer the Mechusar Kippurim. It would have been on the contrary. Bring it from Mechusar Kippurim itself, because Ochel haba machmas tvul yom, that itself comes from a kal v'chomer from Mechusar Kippurim. The kal v'chomer from Mechusar Kippurim is the basis of all ideas of saying that there's a concept of Revi Bakodesh. So that's the fundamental problem with the Gemara over here. And Tosas answered this question, and they say, "V'nir, it appears nevertheless havanichol etfei lasos shlishi mikal v'chomer rishon." It was preferable, or it would be preferable, to create a shlishi by truma from the original kal v'chomer. There was a kal v'chomer that was used earlier in the Gemara to say that by truma you can get to the level of shlishi, and that was a very similar kal v'chomer to the Mechusar Kippurim kal v'chomer that we're using to say Revi Bakodesh. So in other words, what Tosas is saying is, if you're going to use that first kal v'chomer, use it for shlishi by truma. Could go in shlishi haba machmas sheni, for example, again a shlishi that comes from a sheni, the olam tzvei lemevad Revi, and that way, in that sense, you're going to use that kal v'chomer for shlishi rather than Revi. Mimai demaisi leim Mechusar Kippurim, rather than bringing it from Mechusar Kippurim, shetzarach lemaisi shlishi guve mikal v'chomer de tvul yom de pasal betruma, because then you're going to essentially have a double kal v'chomer. You're going to have a shlishi by truma from a very similar kal v'chomer from tvul yom, followed by another kal v'chomer by Mechusar Kippurim, which is an almost identical kal v'chomer. It's like a kal v'chomer built on a kal v'chomer, and so Tosas is saying that's what we're trying to avoid over here. We're saying that if he holds like Abishol, let's avoid the kal v'chomer that's made based on a kal v'chomer. Now, in any case, Tosas says that's not the greatest answer. Afagav de bein kach uvein kach have kal v'chomer ben kal v'chomer. The truth is, no matter which way you go, you are getting a kal v'chomer derived from another kal v'chomer. Miula lume koach shlishi adif leitzvei. Nevertheless, to make that third level of tumah, to make that a little stronger, to avoid the Mechusar Kippurim kal v'chomer and instead use the kal v'chomer again by shlishi, that kal v'chomer that's similar to Mechusar Kippurim, that is preferable to the Gemara. That's Tosas' approach. But in any case, from Tosas' question, you see the fundamental issues that you have to deal with in this Gemara. And the Gemara continues, Amar Ravasi, Amar Rav. Ravasi says that Rav says, V'amri lo Amar Rabba ben Isi Amar Rav. Some have the version that it's Rabba ben Isi says that Rav says. And they say the following, Rabbi Meir of Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Eliezer. Kulu Svirulu, they all hold that the Ein Sheni Osa Shlishi B'chulin, that a Sheni, if you have a piece of food that is Tameh at the level of Sheni, it does not create a level of Shlishi Tumah by Chulin. We saw an opinion in the Mishnah that there is a concept of Shlishi by Chulin. The point of the Gemara over here is that all of these Tanoim hold that that is not true. There is no level of Shlishi Tumah when it comes to Chulin. And now the Gemara explains each Shita. Rabbi Meir, where do we see this in Rabbi Meir? The Tanan, as we learned in a Mishnah, Kol Haton Bias Mayim Midivrei. So from any situation situation where a person needs to immerse in water on a derabanan level, so it's going to create tumah by kodesh, and it's going to create disqualification by truma. Umutter b'chulin uv'meiser, and it's going to be mutter when it comes to chulin and meister. Divrei Rabbi Meir, that's the opinion of Rabbi Meir. The Chachamim osrin b'meiser, and the Chachamim say that by meiser there is going to be a prohibition. It's going to be mutter by chulin, but there's still a prohibition when it comes to meiser. Rashi explains kol aton bias mayim midivrei sofer, meaning as follows: kol shu tar min haTorah. Let's say you have something that on a doraisa level it's tahor. The Chacham has kiku lavo b'mayim v'litar, but the Chachamim said they have to go into water and purify. It's just a din d'Rabbanan. What's an example? Kagon habar rosho v'ruba b'mayim shuvin. For example, somebody who his head and the majority of his body goes into drawn water. V'ochel chatzi pras ochlin tameim, or somebody eats a half a pras of food that's tamei. V'hayadayim, or let's say you're talking about a person's hands. Sheitzrichim tefila, those need immersion. Kulam b'toras shnayim hitinum. The point over here is they all have the level of being a sheni l'tumah. When we talk about this d'Rabbanan tumah, it's the level of sheni, and therefore mitamin is hakodesh lios shlishi. So a sheni can make kodesh into a shlishi, which can then v'yas a revi, and that can make another level, a revi. We said a revi by kodesh, uposlan es truma, and then also they can disqualify truma, meaning truma can only go to the level of shlishi, but cannot go beyond. And then it said mutter b'chulin uv'meiser. It's mutter by chulin meiser. You see clearly by chulin it's going to be mutter. There is no shlishi when it comes to chulin. By meiser, of course, again it's a machlokas over here between Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim. The Chachamim osrim b'meiser ba'achila. Rashi explains over here, when the Chacham are strict by meiser, that's only in terms of eating it, avol negia shari, but in terms of touching it, it's going to be permitted. V'chulin af lechel. Now when it comes to chulin, so even the eating is going to be permitted. And Rashi continues, V'achi b'chagiga v'hu adinami de l'Rabbanan ein sheni osa shlishi b'chulin. Again, that's said in chagiga, and that's what we're saying. According to the Rabbanan, there is no shlishi by chulin. In other words, you don't have to only pick on Rabbi Meir over here. We're saying Rabbi Meir holds there's no shlishi by chulin. The Chachamim also say that. And the only reason they're not listed over here among the Tanoim who hold there's no shlishi by chulin is just because there's no name given to the Chachamim. For Rabbi Meir machlukaso kamer. The Gemara just means to say Rabbi Meir and those who argue with him in this Mishnah. The point is over here, it's clear that there's no shlishi by chulin. And the Gemara continues, Rabbi Yossi, where do we see that in Rabbi Yossi? Hadi Amran. So we've already mentioned, according to Rabbi Yossi, like we said before, Rabbi Yossi holds you only have this tumah go beyond the level of sheni when it comes to truma and kodesh. It doesn't apply to chulin. And we will just mention over here that the meiser we're talking about over here in this Mishnah is meiser sheni. And the Gemara continues, Rabbi Yossi, where do we see in Rabbi Yossi that there's no shlishi by chulin? So Hadamar, it's really the Rabbi Yossi that we quoted above, and the Gemara explains, Dimise, because if it was true that there was shlishi by chulin according to Rabbi Yossi, so then you could use the same kal v'chomers he uses, laisi l'revi b'truma. You could actually use those kal v'chomers to have a revi by truma, v'chamishi by kodesh. You can go all the way as far as a chamishi by kodesh, but he doesn't go that far. He only goes to shlishi by truma and revi by kodesh, and that tells you that by chulin, the limit is going to be sheni. Rashi says, Dim isa de shlishi b'chulin min haTorah. If it was true that there was shlishi by chulin min haTorah, laisi revi b'truma, kal v'chomer. You could do the same kal v'chomer mitvul yom. The same kal v'chomer from tvul yom would actually get you to a revi by truma, because truma would be higher by one level. Kedai sid l'shlishi, the same kal v'chomer we brought earlier, le'el misheni b'chulin. We brought that from sheni by chulin. V'chamishi by kodesh, and you can get as far as chamishi by kodesh, me revi b'truma. From the case of revi by truma, you can go to the level again, because kodesh is one level higher. Mikal v'chomer mi mechusar kippurim, from the same kal v'chomer of mechusar kippurim. Kedai sid l'revi le'el mishlishi b'truma, like we did earlier when we brought when we said revi by kodesh from shlishi by truma. Again, this is the same Rabbi Yossi. He's making these same kal v'chomers based on tvul yom and based on mechusar kippurim to get to shlishi by truma and revi by kodesh. But again, if chulin was already at the level of shlishi, then everything would be moved. Everything would be moved down another level, and truma would go to revi and kodesh would go to chamishi. And the Gemara continues, Rabbi Yoshua, where do we see in Rabbi Yoshua that there's no shlishi by chulin? T'tanan, as we learned in the Mishnah, Rabbi Eliezer says, ha'ochel ochel rishon rishon. If somebody eats a food which is a rishon latuma, he becomes a rishon latuma. Sheni sheni, if he eats a sheni latuma, so he becomes a sheni latuma. Shlishi shlishi, if he eats a shlishi latuma, so he becomes a shlishi latuma. Rabbi Yoshua says, ha'ochel ochel rishon v'ochel sheni. If somebody eats an ochel rishon and an ochel sheni, so then he becomes a sheni. Shlishi sheni b'kodesh ve'en sheni b'truma. If he eats a shlishi, so then he becomes a sheni in terms of kodesh, but he doesn't become a sheni in terms of truma. But now Rabbi Yoshua qualifies, how is it possible that you're eating a shlishi? Because if you have you have truma, let's say, that can become a shlishi, but it becomes tameh, you have truma that's a shlishi, it's actually prohibited to eat truma that's tameh. So how does this case even exist? So Rabbi Yoshua explains, bechulin shenasu al taras truma. We're talking about chulin which you treat as if it's truma. Sometimes you can be strict with chulin and say, I'm going to treat this like truma, and I'm going to try to keep this as holy, as pure as truma. So in that case, we're talking about that situation when you have chulin that you're protecting very carefully, and it becomes a shlishi. So then that's where Rabbi Yoshua says that if you eat that shlishi, so then he's a sheni with regards to kodesh, and he's not a sheni with regards to truma. But the point over here is we're going to learn from Rabbi Yoshua's words. Rabbi Yoshua says, bechulin shenasu al taras truma, al taras ha-truma in, al taras ha-kodesh lo. He specifically talks about taras truma and not taras kodesh, meaning what he's saying is, if you have chulin al taras ha-truma, that's why it's at the level of shlishi, but he doesn't talk about chulin al taras hakodesh. So therefore, what do you see? Alma kasavar ein sheni osa shlishi bechulin. You see from that by sheni you don't have a sheni cannot cause a shlishi by chulin, because if there was such a thing as shlishi by chulin, so then already you talk about a revi, you talk about chulin that you're being strict with at the level of kodesh. He only talks about chulin that you're being strict with at the level of truma, because that's the level where you're going to be strict. By chulin in general, you don't get the shlishi, and when you're strict with it at the level of truma, that's when you talk about a shlishi. And Rashi explains, this is the opinion again of Rabbi Eliezer, ha'ochel ochel rishon chatzi pras me'ochel rishon, that's a half a pras from an ochel rishon, nasa gufo rishon l'tuma midrabanan. These are all halachas midrabanan. He becomes a rishon on a derabanan level, va'ochel ochel sheni nasa gufo sheni. If he eats a sheni, he becomes a sheni on a derabanan level, v'shchita schulin mefarish taima, sha'osas ha'ochel chomer k'ma'echel ba'ashochitz. And the Gemara and Chulin, they explain the reason for this. Rabbi Yoshua Omer, ha'ochel ochel rishon, ha'ochel ochel sheni. Rabbi Yoshua says either a rishon or a sheni. If you eat either of those, he becomes a sheni. Ma'achel rishon lo avid le rishon el sheni. Again, if he eats an ochel rishon, he only becomes a sheni, not a rishon. In ochel chamer k'ma'achel, because we're not going to say that it becomes as strict as what he's eating. Aval ma'achel sheni also so sheni. But if he eats a sheni, so then actually he does become a sheni. Vasum mefarish taima matzino sha sheni also sheni al dei mashkin. They give a reason over there. We find that when it comes to sheni, a sheni can sometimes create a sheni. We don't find that by rishon, so therefore it doesn't matter according to Rabbi Yoshua whether it's an ochel rishon or an ochel sheni. He's a sheni. And shlishi, if he eats a shlishi, so sheni la kodesh. So then he's going to be considered a sheni with regards to kodesh. Ha'ochel ochel shlishi nasa gufo sheni la kodesh im yika b'kodesh yitzmenu lifts a load echad. Means to say again, his body's going to be considered like a sheni, that if he touches kodesh, it can even go one level further. It's going to go again to the level of ultimately revi by kodesh. V'asam mefarish time. Over there they give the reasons for all these things. V'chol hanach tumas midrabanan inu. All the tum we're talking about over here is on a drabanan level. B'chulin shenasu al taras truma. And finally Rabbi Yeshua says, what are we talking about? What chulin is shlishi? We're talking about chulin that's treated as if it was truma. Be'ezu chulin amru sha'ochel shlishi shalehen nasa sheni la kodesh. What kind of chulin that if you eat it as a shlishi, then you become a sheni in terms of kodesh? B'chulin shenasu al taras truma. We're talking about chulin that was treated like truma shabaleim kohen. It means the owner of this chulin is a kohen. V'rogel b'truma, he regularly eats truma. V'kibel olav lechol chulin shalo b'taras truma. So he took a kabbalah upon himself that he's going to eat chulin as if it was truma at the level of purity of truma. Kadesh rogel truma also b'tara. That way he'll ensure that he'll always eat his truma b'tahara. As kukol and hilkach mashkachas b'shlishi de b'chulin acherim lo mashkachas shlishi. That's the only way that again you can have shlishi by chulin. Altaras truma in chulin grady lo man degaris altaras hakodesh lo. Now Rashi points to our gear. So what is our gear talking about? That it says altaras truma, not altaras hakodesh. If you have our gear so hachi mefarish lo, what it means is as follows: altaras hakodesh lo dehavelu chulin grady shamatves chulin lataras hakodesh. The idea is if somebody's going to treat chulin as if it was at the level of purity of kodesh, but l'daito, that's already crazy. That's considered something that nobody would do. Ve'en b'dvar of klum, and that wouldn't be worth anything. But again, the point is the same. The idea is that chulin naturally can go to the level of sheni, and then the stringency takes it to the level of shlishi. And the Gemara continues, Rebbe Lazar, where do we see in the sheet of Rebbe Lazar that there's no shlishi by chulin in Tanya, as we learned in a Brisa, and they point out that this is actually a Mishnah in Taharis. Rebbe Lazar, Rebbe Lazar says, Shloshtan Shavin, all three of them are equal. Harishon, when you have a situation of a food that is a Rishon level tumah, that is a first level tumah, Shebe Kodesh, Shebe Chulin, Shebe Truma, whether that ochel is Kodesh or Chulin or Truma, Mitame Shnayim Uposel Echad Bekodesh, so it's going to go two levels of tumah and then one further level of disqualification by Kodesh, meaning it goes to the level of Revi by Kodesh. It has one level of Tumah and one further level of disqualification by Truma, meaning it goes to a Shlishi by Truma, and then one further level of disqualification by Chulin, meaning it only goes to a level of Sheni by Chulin, and you see from Rebbe Lazar that there is no Shlishi when it comes to Chulin. And the Gemara continues, Rabbi Eliezer. Where do we see in Rabbi Eliezer that there's no shlishi by chulin d'tanan, as we learned in the Mishnah? Rabbi Eliezer says, challah nitelas min hatahor ala tamei. A person is able to separate challah from a pure dough on an impure dough. Keitzad haso shtei isos. Let's say you have two pieces of dough. Achas tahora v'achas tameya. One is pure and one is impure. Notel kedei challah meisa shelo hurma chalasa. You take the amount of challah from the pure dough if challah has not yet been taken from that dough. V'nosen pachos mikabetza be'emsa. And then you take less than a kibetza of dough and you put it in the middle. You have to connect the two pieces of dough, but you don't want the pure dough to contract tumah, so you take less than a kibetza, which is not able to convey the tumah. Kedei litol min hamukaf. That way you're taking the dough and it's considered mukaf, it's considered nearby, it's considered connected, and therefore the challah you're taking from the pure dough is going to be effective in terms of the impure dough. Rashi explains, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, challah nitelas min hatorah ala tamei. Rabbi Eliezer says challah can be taken from the pure dough and the impure dough. Reisha demasnisim Meseches challah hachi. The beginning of that Mishnah in challah is as follows: Shir challah echad michafdala. The general amount of challah that a person needs to separate is 1/24. Nitmo isasa shogeges o anusa. Now, if the dough becomes tamei, b'shogeg or bonus echad mimemches. So then he just has to separate. He could do less, 1/48. Nitmus b'mezin. Now let's say it became tamei on purpose, so there already. So then echad michafdala. Then you have to do 1/24, shelo yehei chote niskar, because we don't want the sinner to profit. If he purposely made it tummy, he shouldn't get away with just 1/48. He has to take 1/24. Rabbi Eliezer says, here's the solution. Hechad denitmes mezida. In a situation where he purposely made it tummy, so tilosh acheres betahara, so he should knead another set of dough and keep that pure. V'titol min hatahora ala tamei. Then he could separate from the pure dough and separate enough to count for the impure dough as well. Mishum the mitzvah litro min amukaf, and there's a mitzvah to take truma, or to take the schala rather, from nearby dough. So you're going to have to connect these two pieces of dough. So keitzad tasa. So what should he do? Sheyehei min hamukaf, that it should be able to be nearby utahora, but still considered to be pure. No telas kedei chalas hatameya meisa hatorah. He takes the amount that needs to be taken from to pater the challah that's tummy as well from the dough that's pure. Ad shelo horma chalas. Of course, that dough you have to have that you didn't separate challah yet from that pure dough. Do you horma chalas at the Torah? Because if you already separated challah from the pure dough, sulam matzi lafrushim min aptor alachiv. So you can't separate any further and say I'm going to take from something which was already taken care of and use that for something which I need to take care of. That, of course, you can't do. It's not going to be called chal anymore. So again, you have to take a dough that you didn't separate anything from it, and then you separate enough to cover both the tahora and the tameya. And how do you make it mukav v'nosenes pachos mikabeitza be'emsa kadei litrum and amukaf? You put a less than a kabeitza of dough in the middle in order that it be considered mukaf nearby. Mukaf lashon mechubur u'makurav. The word mukaf means it's attached, it's close. Again, a similar terminology is used in Meseches Beitza. We learn this from a pasuk that it has to be min hamukaf. It says v'haremosa mimenu min hamukaflo. We understand that to mean nearby besifri hilkach tzricha. So therefore, again, Rashi is going to go on to explain that's why you need to put this pachos mikabeitza in the middle, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Lamed Amud Beis.